What if everything you thought you knew about cavemen was wrong? Forget the cartoonish images, men in furs grunting unintelligibly, dragging clubs, dragging women. Those aren't representations, they're distortions, and they've shaped our imagination for far too long. Because the truth is, prehistoric humans weren't primitive. They were perceptive, ingenious, relentlessly adaptive. For over 2.5 million years, our ancestors lived without cities, without writing, without metal. But that doesn't mean they lived without complexity. In fact, that span of time, the Paleolithic, or Old Stone Age, makes up more than 99% of human history. Practically everything we associate with modern civilization is a blink compared to the depth of that timeline. The people we call cavemen were not some awkward halfway point between ape and human. They were human, just living in a world far more dangerous, unpredictable, and raw than our own. And yet, they thrived. They crafted tools from flint with precision that rivaled engineering. They understood seasons and cycles, the movement of animals, the taste of edible roots hidden beneath soil. They buried their dead with intention, and painted dreams onto walls in pigment made from ochre and charcoal. They didn't build skyscrapers, they built memory. What we often forget is that Homo sapiens wasn't alone. We shared this earth with cousins Neanderthals, Denisovans, Homo floresiensis, and others lost to time. We competed, we coexisted, and sometimes, perhaps, we loved. The story of cavemen isn't a linear march toward progress. It's a vast web of experiments in being human. And no, they didn't all live in caves. Some built shelters from mammoth bones. Others crafted tents from hide. They moved with the land, with the animals, with the weather. They weren't stationary. They were strategic. The term caveman has always suggested something half-formed, something waiting to evolve. But the people of the Paleolithic weren't waiting for anything. They had language, they had art, they had society, they had wonder. Their world was dangerous lions, hyenas, saber-toothed cats, starvation. But their answer to danger was not fear, it was collaboration. They survived by leaning into each other, not away. They formed bonds, told stories, passed down knowledge not in textbooks but in fireside rituals and patient demonstration. And that's the truth we often miss. These weren't failed drafts of modern humans. They were humans, fully realized, fully alive. And the more we uncover from the smudges of red ochre in Blombo's cave to the charred remains of hearths in Terra Mata, the clearer that becomes. So, what did they do all day? What did survival look like, not as a struggle, but as a rhythm? In the chapters that follow, we'll walk through a single day in the Paleolithic. From the crackle of morning embers to the hush of nightfall. From flint-sharpened tools to bone-flute lullabies. And in doing so, perhaps we'll come to understand not just how they lived, but how we came to be. There were no clocks, no alarms, no rigid schedules. The day began when the sky shifted from black to gray and the wind changed tone. When birds stirred in the trees and embers under stone flickered back to life. Someone always kept the fire alive through the night, usually a young one not yet strong enough to hunt, or an elder too wise to sleep deeply. The fire wasn't just warmth, it was continuity, a thread from yesterday into today. With dawn, the group would stretch, yawn, scan the horizon. Not with panic, just awareness. Was the water level lower? Were there new prints by the stream? Did the air smell of animal? Water came first. A short walk to the spring or stream, cupping it in hands or filling containers made from animal hide or folded bark. Children learned to read the water as if it were language, where it ran fast, where it grew bitter, where the deer drank and the cats watched. Then came the day's core question. Do we hunt, do we gather, or do we prepare? Some days the answer was clear. A fresh set of tracks, a thicket of berries almost too ripe. Other days it was guesswork, ritual, memory. The old ones would squint at the clouds, feel the wind, Remember how last time the roots ran deeper after a heavy moon. Hunting wasn't always done by men. That's a modern invention. In most small Paleolithic bands, roles were shared based on need and skill. Sometimes it was the strongest who led the hunt. Other times, it was the one who moved quietest, or the one who remembered where the elk had passed last season. A group might split, some heading out with spears, others with baskets. Gathering wasn't passive. It required encyclopedic knowledge of seasons, soil, poisons, cures. Which tubers needed soaking, which berries fermented too quickly, which mushrooms fed the gut, and which silenced the lungs. Midday brought heat, even in colder regions. It was a time for shade, sharpening tools, weaving, watching children play, imitate the adults. There was no word for education, but everyone learned by doing, by watching, by trying and failing under watchful eyes. Sometimes there was waiting, hours of tracking that led nowhere, baskets filled slowly, spears thrown in vain, and that was okay. The rhythm of the day wasn't success, it was persistence. By late afternoon, the hunters would return, if lucky, with meat slung on poles or draped across shoulders. The gatherers, with roots, greens, fruits, maybe honey. There was no hierarchy between them. A fat root could be more valuable than a skinny rabbit. A patch of edible leaves meant 3 days without walking miles. Evening was transformation. As the light waned, people gathered around the fire. Not just for heat, but for meaning. Food was shared equally. Even those who had brought nothing ate. That was survival, not of the fittest, but of the most connected. And then came the stories, a hunt retold, dramatized with sound and gesture. A dream from last night, interpreted as warning. A song, a pattern scratched in dust, fingers dipped in charcoal tracing symbols on cave walls. Maybe it was art, maybe it was magic, maybe both. Sometimes there were rituals, a tooth buried, a stone placed, a baby named, a fire rekindled with a whispered word. The line between the practical and the spiritual was thin, so thin, it barely existed at all. And when the sky turned black again, when the animals quieted and the fire settled to coals, they curled against fur and stone and one another. No one was truly alone. They never were. They didn't mark time in minutes or hours. They marked it in warmth, in hunger, in laughter, in the hush that falls just before sleep. And so the day ended, not with closure, but with continuity. Because in the Paleolithic world, every day was survival, but also something else we often forget. It was life. They didn't have machines, but they had memory, muscle, and ingenuity. Every tool began as an idea, a chipped stone, a broken bone, a problem that needed solving. And the hands that solved it were steady, practiced, and deeply aware of their materials. Toolmaking wasn't a rare event. It was a daily ritual, a form of thinking through the fingertips. Some stones were chosen for their sharpness, others for how they broke under pressure. A skilled knapper could feel the exact angle and force required to split off a flake, not by accident, but by intention, refined over generations. The oldest tools we've found, Oldowan choppers from 2.6 million years ago, were already efficient. Acheulean hand axes, symmetrical and bifacial, emerged over 1 million years later. They weren't crude. They were consistent, purposeful, elegant, and they weren't limited to stone. Wood was just as essential, though it rarely survives. In Schöningen, Germany, archaeologists unearthed wooden spears nearly 400,000 years old, balanced, carved with precision, tips hardened by fire. Weapons not for scavenging, but for hunting. Their craftsmanship speaks of understanding, not just of materials, but of physics, trajectory, aerodynamics. Even antler, bone, and ivory became raw material, pierced into needles, carved into fish hooks, ground into awls. Their creators understood not just form, but function. These tools weren't toys. They were lifelines, extensions of the body, tuned for survival. And behind them all was something even more revolutionary than stone: fire. It's hard to overstate what fire changed. It extended the day, softened food, protected from predators, created warmth in an Ice Age world. And, perhaps most importantly, it brought people together, a circle of light in the darkness, a center around which stories could be told, wounds dressed, strategies planned. Controlling fire didn't happen instantly. Nature offered it in flashes, lightning strikes, burning grass. But learning to carry embers, to coax flame from friction, to feed it with the right kind of wood. Those were breakthroughs. Not of muscle, but of observation, of patience, of trial, error, and memory passed from mouth to mouth. Some archaeologists believe hominins were using fire over 1 million years ago. Others push the date further back. In places like Gesher Benot Yaakov in Israel, clusters of charred seeds and burned flint suggest not just fire, but fire placed. Fire used with purpose, with design, and fire changed the body. Cooked food meant fewer parasites, easier digestion, more energy. Energy that could fuel larger brains, smaller teeth, shorter guts. Even the way we breathe changed. Our mouths, freed from raw chewing, began to shape more complex sounds. Fire didn't just feed us, it helped us speak. With tools and fire came a new kind of survival. Not reactive, but creative. We weren't just responding to nature anymore. We were shaping it. We cut trees, dug roots, crushed pigments, sharpened antler, split hides. Not randomly, but with a sense of sequence, of design, of what worked and why. And all of it, every sharpened flake, every smoky hearth, every smoothed shaft of wood points to a deeper truth. That even without maps, without books, without engines or steel, Paleolithic humans were not fumbling in the dark. They were inventing light. Survival wasn't just about finding food. It was about knowing when it grew, where it hid, and how not to die from eating it. Paleolithic humans didn't stumble through nature hoping to get lucky. They read the landscape like a map. They followed blooming flowers as signs of root ripening. They watched bird migrations to predict fruit cycles. They tasted, tested, observed, and remembered. Foraged plants were rarely eaten raw. Many needed processing, soaking, roasting, pounding to make them safe. Some seeds were ground into flour with stones. Some tubers were left to ferment in earth pits. The knowledge to do that didn't come from chance. It came from generations of quiet science experiments conducted not in labs but in daily life. And it wasn't just about calories. They knew which bark reduced fever, which leaves soothed wounds, which fungi numbed pain. Traces of medicinal plants have been found in the dental plaque of Neanderthals' plants they could not have eaten for nutrition alone. This was medicine, learned through experience, passed on through memory. Meat was part of the diet, yes, but not always fresh. Scavenging was common and dangerous. Our ancestors competed with hyenas and lions for carcasses, but they had a secret weapon: fire and patience. Bones left by predators still held marrow-rich, fatty, life-sustaining. With stone tools, they cracked them open, cleaned them, cooked them, turned waste into sustenance. Their digestive systems adapted too. Human stomach acid is far more acidic than most omnivores, strong enough to kill bacteria found in rotting meat. It's a defense forged from millennia of risk and hunger. And when they did hunt, it wasn't chaos. It was planned. They tracked herds by footprints, dung, crushed grass. They knew where animals slept, where they drank. And they didn't always go for the biggest prize. They understood balance. Overhunting could collapse an ecosystem they depended on. Food wasn't hoarded, it was shared. In many modern forager societies, hoarding is taboo because the group's survival depends on reciprocity. That same pattern likely held true for Paleolithic bands. You brought back what you could, and you gave what you had. Storage was limited but clever. Meat was dried near fire. fruits were sun-wilted. Some groups used underground pits. In frozen climates, the ground itself became a natural freezer. Perishables were managed with ingenuity, without jars, without refrigeration, without waste. And they didn't just feed themselves, they shaped the land to do it better. In Australia, Aboriginal fire stick farming controlled burning of forest-created mosaic landscapes, encouraging new plant growth and drawing in game. Evidence suggests similar practices elsewhere, in the Americas, in Africa, even parts of Ice Age Europe. They weren't passive gatherers, they were ecological engineers. They saw the land not as a resource to exploit, but as a partner to understand. Not every root could be taken. Not every tree should fall. They noticed what grew back, what didn't, what changed when a river shifted or the wind blew from a different direction. It wasn't written down, but it was known. And perhaps the most radical truth of all, their diet, for all its simplicity, was often healthier than the early agricultural diets that followed. Paleolithic remains show strong bones, good teeth, low incidence of deficiencies. Compare that to early farmers who often suffered stunted growth, iron loss, and tooth decay from over-reliance on grains. The world wasn't gentle, but they made it livable through knowledge, through sharing, through respect. They didn't conquer nature, they collaborated with it, and they ate not just to survive, but to stay strong, to heal, to remember what plants bloom after rain, and what leaf hides the cure. In a time before science, they practiced it daily. And in a world before certainty, they built their wisdom from dirt, hunger, and care. They painted, they sang, they carved. Not because it helped them hunt better, not because it grew more food, but because something inside them needed to. Long before cities, before temples, before even the idea of gods, there were handprints on cave walls. Negative silhouettes in red ochre, pressed like signatures against stone. Some were tiny, maybe children. Some bore missing fingers, perhaps ritual or injury. Each one whispered the same thing. I was here. I mattered. I belonged. In places like Lascaux and Chauvet, deep inside French caves, animals run along the walls in pigment and light. Bison with lowered heads, horses mid-gallop, not scattered but arranged along curves, along echoes, along places where torchlight would flicker just right. These weren't decorations. They were orchestrations. No one painted alone. The same caves show signs of gathering fire pits, pigments mixed in scallop shells, footprints left by barefoot children beside adults. These were events. Nights of ritual, story, transmission, and they didn't stop at walls. Small figurines carved from ivory, stone, and bone have been found across Ice Age Europe. The Venus figurines' exaggerated breasts, wide hips, little or no face are among the most mysterious. Fertility symbols, goddesses, self-portraits by pregnant women, we may never know for sure. But the repetition, the pattern, means something. Across continents, across time, they kept making her. And somewhere in that same darkness they played music. In Germany, a flute made from vulture bone lies silent in the soil, 43,000 years old, but when reconstructed, still able to play a modern scale. Its holes are perfectly spaced. This wasn't a toy, it was tuned. We have no record of what they played, but we know they played together. Drums stretched from hide, rhythms struck from sticks and stone, singing that echoed down canyons across ice through night. Music bound them, not by language but by breath, beat, and memory. Even in death, symbols endured. Some of the oldest burials show care not just for the body, but for the soul. Flowers placed near the head. Red ochre scattered over bones. A child buried with tools too large for her hands, as if preparing her for some journey. The Neanderthals did this too, burying their old, their sick, sometimes with trinkets. Why? Unless they believed something continued. And in the darkest caves of all, they painted beings that weren't quite human, not quite animal, figures with antlers and human legs, eyes too large, bodies part lion, part man. Were they gods? Shamans? Visions seen in trance? These hybrid forms are everywhere. They speak not of realism, but of imagination, the ability to create what does not exist and to believe in it. That is the birth of the symbolic mind, a mind that could see more than what was there, that could dream, could fear, could hope, that could pass not just knowledge, but meaning. And in that moment, humanity became something new. We were no longer just surviving. We were remembering, reaching, belonging to stories larger than ourselves. Even today, we gather in circles, around stages, around fires, around screens. We sing, we draw, we mourn. We tell stories to children who don't yet understand, and still they listen. That started here, in caves and on cliffs, in whispers and in pigment, in bones hollowed into breath. This was not art as luxury. It was art as necessity, a ritual against forgetting, a song against silence. And it still lives in us. They lived without maps, without clocks, without nations, but they knew where they were, when to move, and how to belong. We often imagine progress as a straight line from stone tools to smartphones, from caves to cities. But perhaps we've mistaken speed for wisdom. Our Paleolithic ancestors may not have had electricity or concrete, but they mastered something we're still chasing: balance. They lived close to the land, not above it. They took what they needed and gave space for things to grow back. They watched, listened, adapted. They were ecosystem managers long before the word existed. In Australia, Aboriginal fire management burning land in precise patches to foster regrowth is now backed by science. But they didn't need science to do it. They needed memory, observation, humility. They didn't extract, they exchanged. Each person carried knowledge that mattered: the plants, the seasons, the way animals moved before storms. They weren't specialists. They were generalists, hunters, gatherers, healers, parents, teachers, all at once. Their intelligence wasn't narrow. It was holistic. And community was survival, not ideology, but necessity. You shared what you had. You carried the child who couldn't walk. You fed the elder who could no longer hunt. Because one day, it would be you. In their world, generosity was a strategy. We call them primitive, but their tools were elegant. Their art was transcendent. Their understanding of time and place was intimate, embodied. And when danger came, cold, predators, injury, they responded not just with strength, but with creativity. A spear improved, a shelter reinforced, a wound packed with crushed bark and soot. Innovation didn't begin with the wheel. It began with survival. And when the day was done, they gathered. Around fire, around food, around story. That circle is the oldest human shape. We still sit in it. We still seek it. There's a lesson there. As our world accelerates, more tools, more noise, more disconnection. It's worth asking, what did they know that we've forgotten? To move with the sun, to trust memory over data, to build with what you can carry, to belong to the land, not just own it, to measure time in laughter and firelight, not just hours, and perhaps most of all to live as though being human is a shared condition, not a solitary pursuit. Our ancestors didn't leave behind empires. They left behind echoes, tools, handprints, songs. They survived ice ages, extinctions, and each other. And from that long, winding path, we emerged. Not because we conquered, but because we connected. Not because we dominated, but because we adapted. Not because we were stronger, but because we remembered how to stay together. The next time you think of a caveman, don't picture a brute. Picture a thinker, a builder, a singer, a parent, a risk-taker, a firekeeper, a memory holder, a human, just like you.